You don't hate laziness. You hate yourself. Why do you really hate being lazy? Be honest. It's not just about the hours lost, scrolling on your phone or lying in bed too long. No, it cuts deeper than that. You're not mad at the waste of time. You're mad at yourself. Not because you rested, but because some part of you believes you don't deserve to rest. That voice in your head, the one that kicks in the moment things get quiet, that's not discipline. That's self-disgust, dressed up as productivity. Picture this. It's a Sunday afternoon, no deadlines, nothing urgent. You sit down to relax, and yet guilt floods in. You feel twitchy, useless, like you're decaying in real time. That's not laziness. That's a war inside you. A part of you believes your worth comes from doing, not being. Erich Fromm warned us about this in The Sane Society, how we've internalized the idea that we're only valuable when we're useful. Not human beings, human doings. And here's the wild part. Your so-called laziness might actually be your body rebelling, a quiet protest against the non-stop grind. Not weakness, wisdom. You're not broken. You're burnt out. But instead of listening, you punish yourself. You spiral. You say, I'm lazy. But what you mean is, I hate how little I feel like I matter when I stop. So the question isn't why you're lazy. It's, why can't you forgive yourself for stopping? Because that's where we need to go next. The lie of productivity culture. They told you staying busy was noble, that the grind never stops, that if you're not moving, you're falling behind. But here's the truth they don't want you to see. Productivity culture isn't about growth. It's about control. From school bells to corporate deadlines, you were trained, conditioned, to equate stillness with failure, to feel guilty when you're not producing. Why? Because a person who can't stop is a person who's easier to manage, easier to exploit. Think about it. The kid who stares out the window in class, labeled a problem. The worker who slows down to breathe, branded lazy. But who decided that worth equals output? Not you. You inherited that lie. Capitalism needs you to be tired, insecure, and constantly proving yourself. School taught you to obey bells, chase grades, and fear falling behind. Hustle culture just rebranded the same sickness. Slap on some motivational quotes, call burnout a badge of honor, and sell you another planner. But let's be real. How's that working out? You're exhausted, not because you're weak, but because you were never meant to live like this. You are not a machine. You don't need to earn the right to rest. Your value isn't measured in emails sent, boxes checked, or goals crushed. And deep down you know that. Here's the kicker. Constant motion doesn't mean progress. Sometimes it just means you're running in circles, driven by fear, not purpose. So if stopping feels like failure, maybe the system wants you to feel that way. And that's exactly what we're going to dismantle next. Freud's superego. Your inner critic isn't you. That voice in your head, the one that calls you lazy, selfish, not good enough. It isn't you, it's your superego. Freud described it as the internalized voice of authority. Parents, teachers, society, everyone who ever told you who you should be. Over time, their voices don't just surround you. They get inside you, until eventually you start punishing yourself, even when no one else is watching. The superego isn't rational. It doesn't care about truth. It's not even fair. It doesn't just judge your actions. It judges your desires. You want to rest? To take a break? To say no, to be still, to feel? The superego whispers, "How dare you?" It doesn't just say you did something wrong. It says you are wrong for wanting what you want. And here's the trap. The more you try to be good, the louder it gets. Because it feeds on guilt. It thrives when you doubt yourself. Freud saw it as a punishing parent living inside the mind. Always watching, always disappointed, always demanding more. It doesn't want you free. It wants you obedient, but you don't have to obey it. Once you recognize that inner critic as an inherited voice, not your own, you can start to talk back, to reclaim space, to choose rest without guilt. And that shift, it changes everything. Doing nothing threatens your ego identity. Doing nothing might look harmless, but to your ego, it's a threat, a direct challenge to the identity you've spent years constructing. Because if your sense of self is built around being productive, strong, or always moving forward, then what happens when you stop? When you're just you without the hustle, you start to feel like you're disappearing. This is where the panic sets in. Not because resting is bad, but because it strips away the armor. No titles, no to-do list, no proof that you're earning your place. Just you. And the uncomfortable question, who am I without all this effort? Most people never pause long enough to find out. It's too destabilizing. The ego clings to identity like a life raft. It needs to feel useful, admired, in control. So when you sit in silence, when you refuse to prove your worth for a moment, it feels like ego death. The image starts to crack. And underneath that polished surface, what do you find? Maybe insecurity, maybe fear, maybe a self that's never been allowed to just be. But here's the twist. That stillness, that void the ego fears so much, it's not emptiness, it's space. Space for the real self to emerge, the one that's not defined by performance or praise. So yeah, doing nothing is dangerous, not because you lose momentum, but because you lose the illusion. And what happens when that illusion finally breaks? That's where we're headed next. Guilt is control. Freud's insight on power. Guilt isn't just a feeling, it's a mechanism, a quiet form of control that works from the inside out. Freud saw this clearly. Guilt isn't always about right or wrong. It's about power. And the most effective power doesn't need chains or punishments. It only needs you to police yourself. From childhood, you were taught to feel bad not just when you did something wrong, but when you even thought about it. That's no accident. Systems, whether religious, political, or cultural, have long used guilt to govern behavior. Why? Because guilt sticks. It burrows in deep. And once it takes hold, you'll punish yourself so no one else has to. You skip rest, not because someone told you to, but because you feel guilty if you don't. You say yes when you mean no. You grind harder than your body can take, not out of love or purpose, but out of fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of breaking the rules you never even agreed to. This isn't personal failure, it's programming. And here's the kicker. The more guilt you feel, the more obedient you become. You stop asking questions. You silence your needs. You fall in line, quiet, exhausted, and compliant. But once you see guilt for what it really is, you stop obeying and you start reclaiming. The unconscious fear of desire. Stillness isn't peace, it's exposure. That's why doing nothing can feel so unsettling. Not because you're lazy, but because you're no longer distracted. The noise dies down, and suddenly something else starts speaking, the unconscious. And that voice? It doesn't follow the rules. Freud believed the unconscious holds everything you've repressed, your fears, fantasies, shame, and forbidden desires. And when you finally stop moving, stop numbing, stop doing, all of it starts to rise. That's the real threat of idleness. It's not time wasted. It's truth uncovered. Ever notice how uncomfortable silence can be? How quickly your mind rushes to fill the gap? Scrolling, music, podcasts, chores, anything to drown out the quiet. But beneath that quiet lives you, the parts you've shoved aside just to function. Maybe you're scared of what you'll find, a desire that doesn't fit your image, a truth you don't want to admit, a pain you thought was buried. This isn't weakness. It's human, and Freud saw it clearly. The ego wants control. The superego wants obedience. But the id just wants. And when you're still, it gets louder. That's why you resist rest. Not because it's boring, but because it's revealing. It forces you to confront parts of yourself you'd rather ignore. But here's the thing. Until you face those parts, they'll keep running your life from the shadows. And in the next section, we're going to shine a light on that shadow. What you call laziness is repression. You call yourself lazy. But what if that label is dead wrong? What if what you're calling laziness is actually repression? Your psyche throwing up roadblocks, not because you're weak or undisciplined, but because something deeper inside you is trying to protect itself. Freud understood this. He knew the mind isn't just a machine that obeys commands. It's layered, conflicted, alive. And when you find yourself unable to act, when you stare at a blank screen, avoid the gym, procrastinate on that dream you swear you care about, it's not that you don't want it. It's that something inside you is stopping you. For a reason. Maybe it's fear of failure. Maybe success would expose you. Maybe acting on that desire would shake up an identity you've spent years building. So instead, your mind hits the brakes. Not to sabotage you, but to protect you from what it thinks is dangerous. Think about it. A person collapsing under internal pressure doesn't always scream. They go quiet. They freeze. They shut down. That's not laziness. That's overload. So before you shame yourself for not doing enough, ask a deeper question. What is my inaction trying to tell me? Because repression isn't random. It's intelligent. It's your mind's last-ditch effort to keep the system running, even if it means shutting everything else down. And if you stop attacking yourself long enough to listen, that's when real movement begins. Next, we'll talk about how to actually hear what that resistance is saying and how to work with it, not against it. Strategy. Reclaim rest as rebellion. Rest isn't weakness, it's rebellion. In a world that wants you exhausted, guilty, and constantly proving yourself, choosing to rest on purpose is a radical act. It's not laziness, it's resistance. Because the system runs on your burnout, it profits off your self-doubt. And when you step back, when you unplug, when you say, no, I'm not grinding today, you're breaking the spell. Conscious rest is more than taking a nap or binging a show. It's an act of self-repair. A way of saying, I matter even when I'm not producing. That's powerful. That's subversive. Because it reclaims your worth from a culture that only sees you as a tool, a brand, a worker. And yeah, it's hard. The guilt doesn't disappear overnight. You'll feel it creep in, whispering that you should be doing more. But that's the old program talking. Let it speak, and rest anyway. Try it. Sit in silence. Do nothing. On purpose. Breathe. Walk. Stare at the ceiling. No goals. No output. Just you, recovering your rhythm. You're not falling behind, you're stepping out. Because real rest isn't escape, it's revolution. And now, let's talk about how to build a life where you don't need to earn your rest at all. Real-world examples. Freud's guilt in action. Steve Jobs was famous for his relentless drive. Yet behind that fire was a man haunted by guilt and fear. Fear of failure. Fear of disappointing not just others but himself. When Jobs would retreat, sometimes for days, the world labeled it as laziness or indecision. But Freud's lens shows us something else. Those moments of inactivity weren't weakness. They were the superego and unconscious wrestling within him. The guilt of not being perfect was so heavy, it sometimes froze him in place. Winston Churchill, too, battled what he called his black dog, deep depression that often paralyzed his action. To the public, his pauses might have seemed like hesitation, but underneath, Freud's theory reveals the superego's grip, punishing him for desires and doubts he couldn't openly admit. His periods of withdrawal were survival tactics, not signs of failure. Look at today's influencers and CEOs. The pressure to perform is nonstop. When they slow down, they get branded lazy or out of touch. But often, they're wrestling with the same inner conflicts Freud described: guilt, fear, the clash between who they are and who they feel forced to be. So next time you feel stuck or lazy, remember, even the most successful are fighting invisible battles. It's not a flaw, it's human. And understanding this changes everything. Final blow. You're not lazy. You're conditioned to suffer. That voice in your head, the one tearing you down, calling you lazy, unworthy, broken, it's not yours. It's planted, fed to you by a system that profits from your suffering, by voices you internalized long before you knew better. It's the echo of 100 rules, expectations, and judgments you never agreed to but carry around like a heavy chain. You weren't born hating rest. You weren't born fearing stillness. Those feelings, guilt, shame, self-loathing, they were taught, conditioned into you by a culture obsessed with hustle, productivity, and output. And the worst part? You believed it was your fault. You blamed yourself for feeling exhausted, for needing breaks, for wanting peace. But here's the truth. You're not lazy. You're conditioned to suffer. This changes everything. Because if the voice inside you isn't yours, then you can question it. You can argue with it. You can silence it. Every time you felt shame for resting, ask yourself, who told me this? Whose rules am I living by? What if rest is not failure, but survival? You're not broken. You're not lazy. You're human. And finally, realizing that is the first step toward freedom. So don't just rest. Rebel. Resist. Rewrite the story you've been told. Because your worth isn't measured by what you do. It's who you are. And that truth, it's waiting for you.